The quilt on my bed was the one my mother made for me when I turned 30. Hand-stitched, pale blue and cream, with small yellow flowers she cut from a dress she'd worn to my father's company Christmas party in 1971. I remember her telling me that when she made it, she said, "I'm putting something of myself into every square." I thought about that quilt the morning I found my daughter-in-law's candles arranged across my mother's old cedar dresser, her lotions lined up where my jewelry box used to be, her reading glasses folded on top of a magazine I didn't recognize. My jewelry box was gone. I stood in the doorway of what had been my bedroom for 31 years, and I thought, when exactly did this happen? I should back up. My name is not important to this story, but my house is. I bought it in 1993 with my husband Gerald, a modest colonial on a quiet street in central Ohio. 4 bedrooms, a narrow back porch that got good afternoon sun, a kitchen with a bay window I always meant to put a window seat beneath and never did. Gerald died 11 years ago. Stroke, fast, and then he was gone. And for a while the house felt too big and too quiet. But it was mine, paid off. My name on the deed. My name alone, because Gerald had added me as sole owner 2 years before he passed, during a health scare that turned out to be nothing but that made us both think about these things for the first time. My son Ryan is 42 years old. He was a good child. Earnest, a little too serious, the kind of boy who organized his baseball cards by team and then by batting average, and then alphabetically within each team because he said that was the right way. He became an engineer. He married a woman named Celeste when he was 35. I was happy for him. Celeste seemed sharp and practical, and she had a dry sense of humor I appreciated. They lived in Charlotte, North Carolina, in a townhouse they rented. I visited twice a year. They came to Ohio for Thanksgiving, and it worked. The conversation happened in March, 4 years ago. Ryan called on a Tuesday evening. He said that his company was restructuring, that his position was being eliminated, that Celeste's firm had offered her remote work, that they'd been thinking, and with my house being so big and with me being alone, wouldn't it make sense for them to come stay with me for a while? Just while they got settled. Well, Ryan found something new. I want to be honest here. I felt something shift in me when he said it. Not a warning exactly. More like the feeling you get when you step on a stair in the dark, and it gives just a little more than it should. You keep walking, but something in your body registers it. I said yes. They arrived in April with a moving truck. I had not quite understood what a while would look like. They brought all their furniture. I had cleared the guest room for them. But Ryan walked through the house the first afternoon with his hands in his pockets, nodding slowly, and said, "You know, Mom, we're going to need the bigger bedroom for Celeste's desk. She needs a proper setup." My bedroom. He meant my bedroom. I told him I'd think about it. That night I lay in my bed under my mother's quilt and told myself this was temporary, that Ryan had just lost his job, that he was stressed, that this wasn't the moment to be rigid. A week later, I moved into the guest room. I told myself it was fine. I told myself it was just a room. It wasn't just a room, but I didn't understand that yet. The months went by. Ryan found contract work by July, part-time at first, then more. Celeste worked from home, which meant she was in my house every day, all day, in my bedroom. At the desk she'd set up where my vanity used to be. She was not unkind exactly, but she was certain about the way the kitchen should be organized, certain about which shelf in the refrigerator was for what. She moved my good cast-iron skillet to a lower cabinet because she said the upper cabinet was where she needed her bakeware. I found my skillet on the wrong shelf 3 days in a row before I stopped saying anything about it. My cat, a tabby named Biscotto, who had been with me for 9 years, was banned from the main living area because Celeste said she was allergic. The vet had confirmed Biscotto was healthy and clean, but Celeste had sneezing spells near her, and what was I supposed to do? Biscotto spent the next 3 years mostly in my guest room with me. By autumn of the first year, Ryan and Celeste had begun to refer to the house in a way that bothered me, but that I could not quite articulate. Small things. "We need to repaint the living room. We're going to get new blinds in here." We. As if the house were theirs. I reminded myself that they were contributing to the grocery bill. Ryan occasionally put gas in my car without being asked. These were good signs. These were signs of good intention. I focused on those. They did not pay rent. I did not ask for rent. I was his mother. The repainting happened in November. They chose a gray that I did not love. I came home from my book club on a Thursday evening to find the living room walls half covered in a color the paint swatch had called Quiet Storm, and that looked in person like the inside of a parking garage. I stood in the doorway, and Celeste looked over her shoulder from the roller she was holding and said, "Doesn't it look fresh?" Ryan said you'd come around. I had not been consulted. Ryan had mentioned it in passing, I suppose. He'd said something like, "Celeste is thinking about freshening up the living room." I had said, "Oh." I had not understood that to mean, "The decision is made, and the paint has been purchased." I came around, that's what I told myself. It's just a wall color. The second year was quieter in some ways and louder in others. Ryan's contract became a full-time position, good money, better than before the layoff. I remember thinking in the spring of that year that maybe they would start talking about finding their own place. I waited for the conversation. It didn't come. Summer passed. Fall came again. I was helping Celeste unload groceries one evening, and she said, quite casually, "I think we should redo the back porch eventually. And close it. Put in some real windows. Make it a proper sunroom. And close my porch. The one I'd sat on every spring morning for 3 decades with my coffee." I said, "That would be a big project." She said, "Worth it, though. It'll add value." Add value. I thought about that phrase for days. Add value for whom? Whose value? Whose house? I began to notice during the third year that certain things had disappeared. A landscape painting I'd had in the hallway, one I'd bought at a local art fair in 1998, nothing expensive but mine, was gone, replaced with a framed abstract print I didn't recognize. My reading chair, the one from the den, had been moved to the basement. A new sectional sofa took up most of the living room. I'd come home one afternoon to find it already installed, massive and modern, in a color Celeste called cognac, and Ryan had looked at me carefully and said, "We thought it would open up the space." I said, "Where is my chair?" He said, "Downstairs." "It's still there, Mom. You can still use it." I went downstairs and sat in my reading chair in the basement, in the dim light next to the furnace, and I held my hands in my lap and stayed there for a long time. I want to say I confronted them that night. I didn't. I went upstairs. I made dinner. I was pleasant. I told myself that I was a reasonable person and that things could be worked out reasonably, and that I did not want to make my son feel unwelcome in my home. My home. I had started to have to remind myself of that word. My home. The incident happened on a Saturday in October, the beginning of year 4. I had been planning a small Thanksgiving that year. My sister's daughter and her husband, my friend Wanda and her husband, just a few people. I mentioned it at breakfast. I said I was thinking of hosting Thanksgiving again this year, that it had been a while. Celeste looked at Ryan. One of those looks married people have, the kind that's a whole conversation compressed into 2 seconds. Ryan set down his coffee mug. He said, "Mom, I think we need to talk about some things." He talked about the grocery costs. He talked about utility bills. He used the word contribution several times in a tone that made the word feel smaller than it usually does. He said that if I wanted to continue living there the way things were, it wasn't really fair, and he paused on that word, fair, as if he'd chosen it carefully, that they were carrying so much of the household, and I wasn't contributing financially. I looked at my son across the table. Across the table I had bought at an estate sale in 2004, in a kitchen with my bay window that I had never put a window seat beneath. I said, "I'm sorry. Are you telling me I need to pay rent?" He shifted in his chair. He said, "I'm not saying rent, exactly. I'm saying a contribution, something fair." I said, "Brian, whose house is this?" He said, "Mom, that's not." He said, "Look, we've been here 4 years. We've put money into this place. We've improved it." He gestured vaguely at the walls around us, at the gray paint I never wanted, at the cognac sectional visible through the doorway. "I feel like we have a stake here." A stake. I excused myself from the table. I went to my guest room, closed the door, and sat on the edge of my bed under my mother's quilt. My cat jumped up beside me and put her head against my knee, and I sat there with my hand on her back, breathing slowly. I thought about the deed. I thought about the single name on it. I thought about Gerald and what he had done 2 years before he died. And why? I called my friend Wanda that afternoon. Wanda is 73 and has known me since we were in the same PTA board in 1988, and she does not soften things. I told her the full story, every part of it. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Honey, you know what you need to do." I did know. I just hadn't been ready to do it. I called my attorney the following Monday. His name is a formal man with a small office near downtown Columbus, who would help me with Gerald's estate and with my own will revisions, and who I trusted. I explained the situation. I explained what Ryan had said. I asked what my options were. He told me, clearly, carefully, without drama. As a homeowner with sole title, I had the right to ask anyone living in my home to leave. In Ohio, since my son and daughter-in-law had been residing there for an extended period without a lease, they were considered occupants, which meant I would need to provide proper written notice before any formal process, but the notice could be 30 days, and the notice was mine to give. I told him to draw it up. I want to explain something. I did not do this out of anger, though I was angry. I did not do this to punish Ryan, though part of me felt that something needed to be answered. I did this because I had watched 4 years pass during which I had moved out of my own bedroom, lost my reading chair to the basement, seen my mother's picture taken off the wall in the hallway and quietly relocated to a box I found in the closet, watched my kitchen reorganized, my porch threatened, my cat confined, my evenings rearranged around other people's schedules. And when I had finally said, simply, that I wanted to host a family Thanksgiving in my own house, my son had responded by suggesting I wasn't contributing enough to deserve to live there. The house was mine. His father had made sure of that, and Ryan had forgotten. Or he had decided to forget. I wasn't sure which was worse. The notice arrived by certified mail on a Wednesday. I knew it had arrived because Ryan called me 12 minutes after the mail carrier came. I was at Wanda's house and I let the call go to voicemail. The voicemail was 6 minutes long. I listened to it once, sitting in Wanda's kitchen with a cup of tea. He was upset. Of course he was. He said I was being dramatic. He said this wasn't necessary. He said he hadn't meant it the way it sounded, that morning at the table, that it had come out wrong, that he and Celeste were just feeling stretched. He said that word again, contribution, and I noticed that even in the apology he didn't actually say he was wrong. I called him back that evening. I said, "Ryan, I love you. That doesn't change. But I need you to hear what I'm going to say, and I need you to hear it clearly." I told him that I had let things go for a long time because I thought I was being supportive and because I didn't want to cause trouble. I told him that somewhere in the last 4 years, I had become a guest in my own home, and I had let that happen, and that was partly on me. I told him that the morning he suggested I pay for the right to live in my own house, I understood that we had reached a place that wasn't good for either of us. He said, "Mom, the house." I said, "Ryan, I know what your father did with the deed. You know too. The house is mine." Silence. I told him I was not asking him to leave because I didn't love him. I was asking him to leave because I needed to be the person who lived in her own house again. I told him he was 42 years old and employed and fully capable of finding a place to live, and that it would be good for him, and good for his marriage, and good for me. He said, "Where are we supposed to go on 30 days' notice?" I said, "Ryan, you've had a full salary for almost 2 years. I think you know where to go." He was quiet for a long time. He said, "I didn't realize how it had gotten." That was the closest he came to an apology that night. I took it. The 30 days were uncomfortable. Celeste didn't speak to me much during that time, which was actually a relief. Ryan was alternately subdued and, on 2 or 3 occasions, sharply resentful. One evening, he made a comment at dinner. I had cooked, because it was my kitchen, and I was reclaiming it one dinner at a time. He made a comment about how some mothers were more supportive than others. I looked at him and I said, I supported you for 4 years in my house without a lease, without rent, and without complaint until the end. I think my support record is fine. He didn't say anything else. They moved out on a Saturday in late November, 2 days before Thanksgiving. I had offered to help them find a short-term apartment and had actually sent Ryan 3 listings from Zillow in the Columbus area that were within his budget. They found their own place, a 2-bedroom apartment in the short north. It was nice. I knew because Ryan sent me a photo unexpectedly, about a week after they'd moved in. He said Celeste had picked out some things and it was coming together. I wrote back, I'm glad. The Saturday they moved out, I stood on my back porch in the cold afternoon air and looked at my yard. The leaves had mostly come down. The sky was the pale gray that Ohio gets in late November. Not dramatic, just quiet. I had a cup of coffee in my hands. The porch was still open. Not enclosed, not a sunroom, just my porch, where it had always been. Biscotto came and pressed against my legs, and I reached down and scratched behind her ears. I went back inside and moved my reading chair back up from the basement that same afternoon. It took me 40 minutes, and I scraped my shin on the staircase railing and sat on the floor laughing at myself, alone in my house, in the way you can only laugh when there's no one else to perform for. I put the chair back in the den, in front of the window, where it belonged. The next week, I called a local painter, a young man named Terrence who had done my neighbor's house the previous spring and done it beautifully. He came over and I showed him the living room. I told him I was thinking about a warm cream, something that felt like the inside of a house and not a parking structure. He understood immediately. He said he had just the thing. My sister's daughter came for Thanksgiving. Wanda and her husband came. I cooked a 14-pound turkey and 2 kinds of pie, and I set the table the way I always used to, with the good cloth napkins Gerald's mother had given us as a wedding gift. The house smelled like sage and butter, and the wood smoke from the neighbor's fireplace drifting through the window. I'd cracked open just a little. At the table, my sister's daughter asked how I was doing. Really doing. I said, I feel like myself again. And I meant it in a way that was physical almost, like something that had been pressing on my chest for 4 years had finally been lifted, and I hadn't understood how heavy it was until it was gone. Ryan called on Thanksgiving evening. I had thought he might not. I picked up. We talked for 20 minutes, carefully, finding our way. He asked how the turkey turned out. I told him it was the best I'd made in years. He laughed a little. I asked about the apartment. He said Celeste had found a good coffee shop nearby and was happy. I told him that was good. He said, Mom, I'm sorry about that morning. The contribution thing. It was out of line. This time the apology was there, real and plain and without hedging. I said, I know it was, but I also know you had been living in someone else's home for a long time, and people start to lose track of things when that happens. It happens to everyone. That's why it needed to end. He said, I didn't see it. I said, I know. We hung up gently. I washed the dishes by myself that night. Wanda had offered to stay and help, but I'd sent her home. I wanted to do it alone, in my kitchen, with the light above the sink the way I liked it, and the radio on low and my mother's quilt folded over the back of my reading chair in the den where I could see it. There's a particular kind of quiet that belongs to a house when it's truly yours. Not empty, not lonely, just still. Just your own breathing and your own rhythms and the sound of water running in your own sink. I had forgotten that quiet. I had not realized I was missing it until it came back. I dried the last dish and put it away in the cabinet where it had always lived. I turned off the kitchen light and walked to my bedroom in the front of the house with the window that caught the morning light. And I pulled back my mother's quilt and got into bed. Outside, the street was dark and quiet. Inside, the house was mine. I've thought a lot about that morning at the kitchen table. The coffee mug Ryan set down. The way he said the word fair, like he'd rehearsed it. And I've asked myself honestly whether I could have stopped it sooner. I think I could have. I think the answer is yes. But I also think I needed to arrive at that table, at that exact moment, to finally understand what had been quietly happening for 4 years. There's something I know now that I didn't understand when Ryan and Celeste first pulled up in that moving truck. Kindness without limits isn't kindness. It's just a door left open. And people, even people you love, will walk through an open door. They'll walk through it and then they'll rearrange the furniture on the other side. And after enough time, they'll start to believe the furniture was always theirs. I don't say that with bitterness. I say it because it's true, and because understanding it changed something in me. What Ryan did, the slow takeover, the paint, the chair moved to the basement, the comment about contribution, none of it happened because he was a cruel person. It happened because I kept absorbing it. Every time I said nothing, I was teaching him that saying nothing was the acceptable response. Every small surrender I made was, to him, permission. That's not blame. That's just how people learn what the limits are. And I had not shown him where they were. The decision to send that notice wasn't easy. It required me to choose my own dignity over the comfort of keeping the peace, and those two things had been pulling against each other for a long time. I had to be honest with myself about what was actually happening, not what I hoped was happening, not the more charitable version I kept constructing in my head, but the plain truth of a woman sitting in a basement in her own reading chair. That honesty took longer than it should have, but it came. And then it required me to act on it, not hope, not hint, not wait for Ryan to notice on his own. Act. Draft the notice, sign the paper, send it through certified mail. That part was hard in a way that surprised me. My hands were steady, but something in my chest was not. You don't send legal paperwork to your own son without feeling it. But I did it anyway, because I had finally understood that doing the uncomfortable thing was the only path back to myself. What I carried out of that experience, and what I hope Ryan carried out of it too, eventually, is that how we treat people closest to us reveals exactly who we are. Ryan is not a bad man, but in those 4 years, he had drifted away from the son I knew, the one who organized his baseball cards with such careful logic, the one who called me every Sunday without fail for years. Somewhere in the comfort of a free roof and a mother who didn't push back, he had stopped seeing me clearly. When people stop seeing each other clearly, that's when the damage starts. I got my house back. More than that, I got myself back. And in a strange way, I think Ryan got his mother back too. Not the version who stayed quiet, but the one who actually means what she says. That's worth more than any sunroom.